Okay, I think we are live. I'm having a little bit of a sorry about this. I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty with making it appear on Facebook at the same time. I tested this yesterday to make sure this worked, and it absolutely now does not seem to be working. So, let's see if this works now. It's sending data, and then we'll be with you. I shall answer some questions. For those of you that are not Patreon members, I am drinking beer. I hope you are drinking beer too. It's nearly New Year's, which is a glorious thing. It is always exciting. Oh, my dad is phoning me. That's not a particularly positive thing. I'll just text him back because he's probably telling me that I've broken something. There we go. So, good vibes. Yes, we are. We have comments. Welcome to a Break Magazine Q&A, where I will answer your many questions about many things. Hopefully, where are we? I'm just going to check that this Facebook Live is working, and if it's not, then I shall give up. All right. Apparently we're live, but apparently it's on my personal page. No, it should be on Break Magazine. So if you're watching on Break Magazine, a Facebook page, let me know. Nope, we're on my personal page. That's funny. Okay. No. Okay, we're all good. Okay, let's answer some questions. Very good. The first question is from a good friend of mine called Owen on Instagram. If you could revisit one ride, what would it be? It would absolutely have to be the video that I made in Nepal in 2016. I know this is quite a nondescript question, but it was a fantastic trip with a company called Explore 360. They are fantastic. And yeah, that is that really. Go watch that video and then go and check out their website because they run amazing trips all around the world. I've done 2 of them now, and they are easily one of the best ways to do an organized tour that is an adventure tour rather than just riding off-road in that kind of way, if that makes sense. If you're not riding off-road for the sake of it and you want a bit more of a holiday but you still want to get off the beaten path a little bit, he runs amazing trips. Chris, he's a fantastic guy. So what happens when you, let me just add this onto the broadcast. There we go. This is a YouTube comment. So if you are commenting on Facebook or YouTube, I can see them in the same place. This is a trick little bit of software. What happens when a guy crashes with the airbag vest and continues riding? Any protection after that? That is a fantastic question. I honestly have no idea. We see it in MotoGP. They seem to stay inflated for quite some time post-crash because people walk around looking all strange and like puffed up. I haven't checked the rules on this, so it might be a case that you can carry a recharge canister, but I think in the rules it says you have to have your vest system recharged and ready to go the next day, but it's kind of I would imagine that the limit on how hard you have to crash for the airbag to go off is quite high. And if you have 2 of those crashes, maybe that's a problem. I think we have to wait and see a little bit on that, on what it actually works like on the ground for riders. But the one thing with that Alpine Star system that most of the riders are going to be used, I'll see if I can get a picture of it up in that Joe Rogan-esque style, is that Alpine Stars is that it's still like a normal off-road riding pressure suit. So you have your elbow and your shoulders and a hard back protector that the airbag is encased in. So that side of you is really well protected even without it going off. Alpine Stars Tech Air Dakar. That should find us on Google. If not, I need an assistant here who's Googling and putting this up. Internet's a bit slow. So we'll ask another question in that. Would I do another Dakar, especially in Saudi Arabia? I don't think so, in all honesty. So we've got a picture of this this suit here. I'll chuck it up on the screen now. I don't think I would, Mark. And not because Dakar is not a great race, but just purely because I think you need to be in the right mindset. Wow, that has gone much bigger than I was expecting. So there you go. You can see with that suit here that we've still got a really good chest protector on the front of it. The back of that system is quite hard as well. So they've essentially managed to make a system that will probably work really well for off-road riding. Still give you really good protection even when the airbag can't go off. So there. And that's that. So yeah, I think just with Dakar in general, Mark, that as I said, it's a really good question, but I think you really need to be in like the right emotional place to want to do something like that. It's not something to take like lightly, and I just don't think I'm there really. I don't have that desire, that burning desire to go and see if I can finish it and to push that hard. I think if I'm going to do something that's bigger like that, it's because it piques my interest in a different way. Probably I'm much more interested these days in less about seeing what I can do and more about having a bit more fun with it and having a bit more adventure with it. There's other events and other trips that catch my interest way more, that are a bit more exciting. I think if you're going to Dakar in Saudi, it's because you want to see if you can do Dakar, or you're looking for a result in Dakar, and trying to figure out who you are and what you're capable of. And I feel a little bit like I did that already when I went to Dakar myself. So I don't feel like I've got too much to prove to myself with that anymore. It's more about trying to have a bit more fun with it and find those things that are just going to be great memories. Yeah, so there we go. Who's your money on for the Dakar win? How do you think Naito will do? I think Naito will finish. I think there's a really big gap between, and he can make up some of that gap. He's an incredible rider. I'm sure he's not unfit. But there's a really big gap between the guys winning that race and where Naito currently is in his career and his life. And you can see that a bit from Andalusia Rally. The special stages, the total winning time was like 10 hours, just over. And Naito was more than 2 hours behind them in a 10-hour race. So the gap there, not in terms of ability, but in terms of desire to go that fast, is big. And they take a lot of risks, the guys at the front of Dakar. I think he can comfortably go top 30 if he has a clean run and no problems and so on. And he should finish with his eyes closed, really, unless he does something silly. And for the win, I said in our podcast the other night that Sam was probably my pick, and it was a little bit because the other two picked the obvious choices, but it's really, I think, really hard to look past Ricky Brabeck at the moment. He seems to have figured all the requisite bits out to win that race, and I think Honda have as well, and it will be very close between the 3 KTM riders and him, I think. Why are roadbooks still paper and not electronic? I think that is purely just because the tech for the electronic roadbook isn't quite there yet. Not that it's not good enough. I think it is good enough. But I think with all of these things of changing fundamental parts like that, ASO need to make sure that they've got it absolutely perfect and they're happy with it before they put it into the race, which is why this year we've got... Last year they tested roadbooks 20 minutes before the start on 5 stages. This year it's every stage. And I think electronic roadbooks will come either next year or the year after. I totally agree. I think they should. They've implemented it in a small way in cars this year. So the co-driver can use a tablet instead of a paper roadbook or some form of electronic roadbook, which is great. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And I think that is just a test of the implementation of it, because most of the factory drivers won't do it. It will be people further down the order, I would assume, who are less worried about the risk. They don't want the race to be decided by someone's roadbook failing, because it happened a little bit when GPSs first came in in Dakar, and people had meltdowns because the tech wasn't reliable and they broke and there was mistakes in them. And it kind of just ruined a few people's races, and there was a lot of arguments over whether they should be doing it. And I think it just needs a bit more time. It'll come, and it's a good thing that it's coming. So that's that. Every December, January, this is from Alex, I get the bug to try roadbook rallies for obvious reasons. What level enduro rider do you need to be to enjoy a roadbook rally, and which one is the best one to start with? You do not need to be a good rider, an experienced, super experienced rider to do roadbook rallies at all. There's a couple that run in the UK that are kind of roadbook events or small races, and they're a great place to start because they're mostly on gravel roads and they're super fun. And if you want to do something overseas, just any of those small European rallies, I think are really good. Something like Hellas, or it's called Greece Rally now, but the one that's based out of Ceres in the north of Greece, that's a little bit more technical, but they're fantastic because also the other thing that you have with those events is there's a lot less pressure than there is with something like Dakar to have to ride every day. If you don't want to ride a day, they just give you a time penalty and you can start the next day. And I think in terms of like the casualness of it and the enjoyment, they're fantastic. The only limit with roadbook navigation and your riding ability is that the better rider you are, the more brain space you've got to read the roadbook and understand it. You have to ride 15% slower than you can to be able to read a roadbook generally. So, and take that information in. You can't have your riding completely dominating your brain. Otherwise there's just not enough space left for everything else. So there's always that to keep in mind. But generally I think a lot of those roadbook riders, if you're medium capable sportsman sort of level enduro rider, you'll enjoy the hell out of a roadbook rally because it's just like another element that adds so much to the adventure, because the event can go to places that you probably wouldn't be able to go to in the first place. I totally think there's so much value in it for that. The enjoyment, the camaraderie of rallies is really high. Most people are just there for a good time. It's a really nice experience generally. So do one, basically. Hello from Canada, Bob. Hello. How are you? But do you want to use that suit for ADV riding? That's a great question. That really depends on how often you crash, how likely you think you are to crash, what your perception of risk mitigation is. I personally probably not, but I don't wear a lot of body armor for most riding anyway. The only thing that I really like about the concept of an airbag is that it is going to do significantly more in a big crash than just general body armor. Like general body armor is really good for stopping you cutting your elbows or like bruising yourself badly. A back protector will help a bit, but there's plenty of risk still in that. A neck brace brings a load of other problems with it, but the way they've built those airbags into a kind of single unit that's not that complicated, it's basically just a simple pressure suit. It doesn't seem to add too much. I think there's a lot of value in that. I can really see a huge benefit to that in the potential for a bad crash. The only problem is the heat management. That's always an issue, right? With any adventure riding, if you go into a hot place, getting rid of your body heat is really important. And I don't know how much that allows you to do that. Now, the thing that they've got in Saudi that seems to be less of a problem with implementing this is that it's not that hot when they go there. The temperature range is kind of from 5 degrees C, so what would that be, like high 30 degree Fahrenheit, I think. I honestly have no idea with Fahrenheit. Up to about 30 to 35 degrees C, so somewhere just under 100 Fahrenheit. That temperature range is not that bad, especially if you're moving. In South America, they had a much bigger problem. Like the temperature regularly got over that 110 degree Fahrenheit, like 40 degrees centigrade temperature, and then it's dangerous. Like you just don't want any heat in your body at all. You need to get rid of it all the time, and even speed doesn't help, right? So that's a whole different story. Adventure riding, I think, you see a lot of adventure people coming from road riding. They want that protection. And I think this is a much better solution than most current body armor solutions in terms of safety. So I think it comes down to personal preference, right? I don't think I would wear one for adventure riding, but if I was going to go and do a rally, I'd probably wear one quite happily. So yeah, hopefully that answers your questions anyway. Speaking, Smudger Smith, I am well. Thank you. I'm very well indeed. I have a beer, which I'm really struggling to drink. I did a live stream before this with Patreon members, and I managed to get the neck done. So I might take a few little breaks to keep drinking. My girlfriend also just commented, do I want sushi for dinner? How is that even a question? Who doesn't want sushi for dinner? Yes, obviously. Where will the best coverage of Dakar 2021 be? What sources will you use to stay on top of it? So I typically always watch the general live stream, the general feed that goes out. So in the Europe, that's on Eurosport. Australia, I think it's SBS. I don't know in the States. It used to be Fox, but I don't know where it is now. Someone else can probably drop that in the comments. I always watch the one on Red Bull TV. It's very different. They use a little bit of the same footage, but quite often they ask different questions. They have a much better presenter situation where they go and interview people. They have people on the ground, and it's a short thing that they make. It's only about 15 minutes for all three categories, but I think it's really good. So that is my other kind of go-to. It's not so well known, but you can get it on redbull.tv, I believe. Most, like if you've got an Apple TV box or Chromecast, you can get it through that as well. So that's really good. And then I follow a website called tracking.nl, which is basically they take the results feed from the official Dakar feed and they put it into a much more usable format. So you can see where people were in the stages and where they were at different checkpoints and how close they are relative to each other in real time. You can garner a lot of information from that. And then beyond that, it's not so easy. There's not really a lot of information on the ground. So I'll try and ask a few people that I know are there, what's going on, if something weird happens. But apart from that, that's it really. That's the limit of what you can find out. ASO sometimes put some stuff on the Dakar website that's useful, but especially during the day, they'll put up if someone stops or something's going on, but they're not very good at relaying like huge amounts of information. So yeah. And if you can't be bothered to look at that, come and have a look at our Instagram story, because I'll be doing little updates as and when I see things on there as well. So I'm trying to tell the story of it a little bit better. So there you go. Occasionally there is another YouTube channel as well, which is normally a couple of days behind, but he specializes in compiling all the handheld footage of what's going on. So it doesn't happen. I don't know that it's happened so much in Saudi because there's not so many spectators, but he was really good at this in South America. I think it was called We Dakar on YouTube, and he would basically just trawl through all of the internet. I don't know how he was doing it, if he was just scraping hashtags and then compile those into a video and upload those every day to YouTube. And then you got clips of things that the TV didn't have, crashes and events happening and just things off people's phones that out in the desert. It was fantastic, but I don't know how well that's going to keep working now that it's in Saudi. It'll probably be less. What have we got next? Alex Jones, yes please, you want sushi too? Will I be riding any rallies in the future for the fun of it? I think absolutely. I've got some plans to make some videos along those lines. And the best way to make videos about rallies is to go and do one. I don't know what they'll be yet. I haven't even kind of thought about that. So I think it just depends a little bit on when things start to open up and what I can afford to go and do, because the one thing with rallies is they are not cheap. So there we go. The answer is yes, but I have no idea what. What beer am I drinking? So this is a free plug for Beer 52 and the 61 people watching this, but I sign up to this thing called Beer 52. So today I'm drinking a Polish beer called Turzek Kumpli. I don't know how you say that. I'm really sorry, any Polish people that are watching this. It's called Piece of Cake. It's a session IPA. It's really good, but I'm not drinking it very fast. Hello from Germany, Flo. Massimo Cristaldi, what a great name. Hi from Italy. Got a 2020 Africa Twin Adventure Sport DCT. Nice bike, but quite heavy, used mainly for touring. For short distances, what about a 300L or a 701? Well, it depends how much money you've got. Those are two very different bikes. I think the 300L, obviously I haven't ridden one, but it's basically the same as a 250L with hopefully a little bit more improvement, is a fantastic bike to get into more serious off-roading. We just talked about it in the other live stream. I had a very similar question, and I think it's one of the most underrated bikes of the last 5 years. Not because it's great, but because it's cheap. And because it's cheap, you can buy them secondhand really cheap. It's got a bit more potential than it comes out of the crate. And I think you're just going to ride it loads. It's a really easy bike to ride. It's very forgiving. If you want to make it better because you're struggling with a few bits, it's not fast enough, it's got the capacity to improve quite a lot. And when you sell it again, you're still going to get decent money for it. It's like a win-win situation all around. It's a great little bike, especially if you live in Europe. The 701, I don't know, is the same story. It's an animal. It's a great bike, but it is totally an animal of a bike to ride. It's really aggressive, really fast, powerful bike. And I think if you start to try and ride more technical stuff with it, you need to be a pretty good rider to get away with it. It's not easy. It's a single cylinder that makes 74 horsepower. It really rips. It handles really good on like dirt tracks, and it's a very good bike for that, but it's not an easy bike. It's just a good bike. Whereas the 300 is an easy bike as well as being pretty good, but they're good in different ways. The 701 has great suspension for trail riding. It's comfortable, but it can take a relatively decent hit. But the 701 is also terrible on the road, really. It's super dirt bike. It vibrates a lot. It's got loads of wind noise and stuff. It's not an adventure trail bike really like that. It feels like an enduro bike with a massive engine in it. So, and it's £10,000. I don't know what's that, like 12,000 euros. My restream hasn't applied the YouTube title caption. Great. That's not very helpful, is it? So are we live now? No, it's absolutely having a nightmare. Okay, I'll fix that afterwards. That's frustrating. Restream. Anyone that knows how to use Restream better than I do, it will be very helpful next time. Thanks. I shall enjoy the Polish beer. Croatia Rally. This is a good one. I have not heard of Croatia Rally. I will have a look at this. I'm going to put that in my browser right now for later. Not Croatia Rally. I would love to go to Croatia. I have never been. Also, do you want to buy a KTM 1290 Adventure R1 irresponsible female owner? No, I'm good, Paul. To be honest, I've seen what you've done to that bike. I don't want one. Thank you. So, have we got any... The host of the rally is called TRX Raid. Okay, well, if anyone's looking for an interesting rally in an interesting part of the world, Croatia Rally. So he did actually have some sensible questions from somewhere as well. I'll see if I can find them, and then I shall answer them. How do we get the studio app up here? David Brown, how's it going? If you could only have one bike in the garage tomorrow, what would it be? What a good question. I'm going to go that, to be honest, I would have my dirt bike, and I would just suffer how uncomfortable it is to ride a long way on the road. But just because I adore riding dirt bikes in a more serious way. I love going and getting stuck in the woods. I love riding wide open around a field in circles. And adventure bikes aren't great at that. I adore riding adventure bikes as well, but I would always take that over riding adventure bikes for my personal enjoyment. So it would be that, and then I would probably just, if I had to ride a long way on the road, suffer the discomfort of it or chuck it in a van. If you're talking about otherwise all-round fun bikes that can do a little bit more, that's a difficult question. I really like the 790 Adventure R, and I haven't done a review to publish the review on it yet, but I really like the new Triumph Tiger. That was a great bike as well. Any of those three, that and the Tenere, would make great just one bike quivers. We'll quote a little bit of snowboard lingo there. Someone has, all right, I will do that, Steph, while trying to answer another question. I'm going to try and change the title of the live stream, because I think we do that in Restream, but end of. So the next question was, curious about your take on not technical bikes such as the Caballero 500 Rally for adventuring. Well, that is the long-standing debate, right? The Caballero 500 is not one I've specifically looked at, but simple bikes are easy to work on and understand. That's a Fantic, I believe. I don't even know what engine they're using for that, but it's cheap and it's simple, and there we go, updated. Yeah, it's a cheap, simple bike and that's always going to have its benefits. I think it's the same with the Royal Enfield. At this point in 2020, there's almost no bikes with fuel injection, so that complicated element is always present, but fuel injection doesn't really break. Like, I haven't had a fuel injection problem since 2012 and I had an Italian Husky 250, and that used to get dirt in the injectors. And since then, every dirt bike I've had, every adventure bike I've had or ridden anywhere, the fuel injection has been pretty much faultless. So I don't think that's something I worry about in terms of the complexity of a bike. I get why people want carburetors, and when you travel the world and you've got crapper fuel, that becomes more of a problem. Really, I think the complexity that you're going to worry about is some of the other electronics that control the bike, throttle position sensors, electronic throttles. Those are the problem parts. And actually, up to you get beyond a Tenere 700, that's when that starts to become a problem. And again, yes, there's no doubt that people with those bikes, especially the less refined ones, have problems with the electronics. The GSs are always flagging up little issues. I know there's running problems with KTM 790s having issues with that. But I think if you've got a cable throttle, just so that element is controlled, all the other electronics don't matter. Like, even with something like a Tenere 700, which is a much bigger, more expensive bike, it's great. So anything working back down that chain of simplicity is going to be awesome for an adventure, because fuel injection is something we can't get away from. And ultimately, I like how easy it is to work with. The other consideration I would put into the mix with something like that, and someone else asked about the AJP PR7, and I haven't ridden that either. One of our readers has got one, a guy called Martin, or viewers, and he loves his. I spoke to him a little bit about it, but I think the problem you have with those smaller manufacturers is that the capacity to have quality control and produce consistent, super reliable bikes isn't potentially there. I'm not saying that's a blanket thing. I don't know specifically on the PR7, but I know people that have had AJPs before or used them for training schools because they're quite cheap, and the reliability is not quite as good. So when you go into that adventure situation, you start to talk about reliability. I think fuel injection is really reliable, but if other wear parts aren't so reliable and they're not consistent parts, you're not using the same wheel bearings as other bikes and so on, that would be something to consider quite heavily. I think the only way to find that out really is to take that leap. But as long as they're relatively simple, I think you can ride any bike into anywhere. The fuel injection is always a question. If you're in the middle of Africa or Mongolia, solving a fuel injection problem is difficult, but they tend not to break. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. So in answer to your question, if you've ridden one a bit and you're not, or you know someone that has ridden one a bit and it didn't like fall apart within the first 4 months of owning it, absolutely a great bike. Good question. What's coming up with me in the coming year? So obviously that is a really difficult question to ask. In the last few months, especially, I reorganized how we did Patreon. So that is a much more consistent system now. We have alternating seasons of Mini Tip Mondays and then the Secret Podcast, and they run kind of in series. So we'll do one season of one season of the other, and rotate that. So that will form like the basis of a lot of the content that goes on Break Magazine. And then within that, we have the similar videos that we've been doing in the past, retro versus modern and standard bike reviews. And then I have a couple of other extra ideas. I'll give you some little tidbits of what they're going to be. One of them will be called My Patreon Adventures. I'm going to leave that there and let you figure out what the rest of that is. I would really like to produce, if we can, and we can make it happen with the current climate, a little series on getting into rallies, because rallies are awesome and we get questions about them all the time. And to just do a kind of, this is how you build a rally bike, we're going to go and do a rally, this is how you do your navigation, and you kind of figure that bit out, and this is what the experience of doing a rally is like. That would be awesome to do that if we can. And then that's probably going to be the end of the year. To be honest, it's completely dependent on what we're capable of doing in this year, really. But that is what I would like to do with 2021. So Massimo says the Fantic has a Chinese 40 horsepower engine. That's pretty good out of a Chinese motor. I think it's a 500 4-stroke. Again, I think that is a big question mark. Not because it's Chinese, but because if it's not coming out of a factory with really high standards for testing and development and quality control, you stand to take a risk with riding on that engine, because I would imagine that there's not 10,000 people in Africa that have got those parts. So then you have to figure out how you're going to get those parts. Even if it's you DHL them somewhere, if something goes wrong with it, how do you fix it? Many people that have taken 690s around the world have had this problem. There's been like consistent finger follower problems on older ones where people broke them, and they're just problems you have to solve and figure out how you're going to solve. But if you trust it, then absolutely right. But it's part of the adventure, right? If it breaks down in the middle of nowhere, that's kind of ultimately becomes the exciting bit. So there. Ivan, for what concerns dirt bikes, do you prefer 4-stroke, 2-stroke, or vice versa? And what kind of pros and cons do you see between choosing the two? I would say that generally I'm a 4-stroke person, but just because of the type of riding I typically do. I have raced 2-strokes quite a bit in the past. I did a full season racing a Beta as a project bike a long time ago now, 8 years ago. And I really enjoy riding 2-strokes, but you have to put way more effort into learning to ride them well and be riding one regularly to understand it. So I also think 2-strokes are much more suited if you're riding a lot of technical terrain. And as soon as you start to put some distance into that, or you're riding not basically in a wet European country, or really technical riding out in the desert somewhere, then 2-strokes kind of start to fall apart. They're great for anything that's technical, or if you accept their limitations and just really like the way they ride. But for everything else, a 4-stroke is better because it is smoother, it deals with bumps better. They're much easier to just jump on and ride if you haven't been riding dirt bikes a lot, or you're not putting time in on 2-stroke. If the ground and grip is good, the engine braking is really useful as a tool. And so I think for anything rally-wise, anything riding in a little bit quicker terrain, or just that kind of a bit more casual experience with riding bikes, 4-strokes are better, and it just makes life a little bit easier. You don't have to mix gas, you don't have to worry about where you're going to get your 2-stroke oil, and so on. But that being said, that doesn't mean you can't have a great time on a 2-stroke. Like 2-strokes are fantastic. And that is maybe, depends on the situation, but maybe one of the ideas we have for part of our rally project is to build a rally 2-stroke. Not because it's a good idea, but just because we can. So Could you please explain the secret podcast logo on the screen? I couldn't find it on Spotify. Sorry if I already answered. So the secret podcast is something that I run through my Patreon page, and some of the episodes will be going to Spotify through our Acast, but they're not published yet. And it's a podcast that I do for Patreon members, which is the running theme of it is to talk about topics with specialist guests that provide like a really heavy educational element. So whether they are about riding tips or something else in the sphere of adventure and dirt bike riding. Some of the episodes we did this year, we did one public one with Lyndon Poskett about how to build your perfect adventure bike. And then we followed that up with a bunch of other episodes, including probably my favorite one from the first season was with a guy called Dylan Wickrama, and he turned his GS into a raft. So the whole episode, it was a bit about his story of why he did that and why he sailed 600 kilometers through the Pacific Ocean on a GS, and a little bit about the technical side of how you would go about pulling a GS apart and making it into an outboard motor. That's the idea behind it, is to take great subjects and great guests and dive a little bit more into some of the stuff that they won't have talked about before, the whats and whys. We did another one with Chris Birch, which will come live in the near future, about how to get into dirt bikes and some of the technique changes you have to make and the pitfalls and how to overcome those as you start riding dirt bikes and so on. We did a podcast on how to get into rallies with my dad as well. We went through all those elements. If you want to see some of those episodes and see the upcoming season, if you head to patreon.com/break magazine, you can find all about it there. I'll pop the link in the description below afterwards. That was a lovely segue. What a plug. We've been in lockdown in wet, rainy Wales. When all is lifted, where will you ride almost without a thought? What a question. I don't know if I can answer that. I'm probably will just go and ride the local enduro track we had. They run a lot of practice days there at the moment, and I grew up riding around this piece of land really close to my parents' house. And when it was just common land and it was kind of allowed for us to ride on it by the local police, as long as you didn't ride too close to the houses, they were very relaxed about it, which is quite unlike things in the UK. But now it's an official practice ground, so I will probably just go and ride around there in circles all day, and then I will follow that up with a ride to North Wales, because if you need to go anywhere in the UK to have a pretty view and enjoy your riding, North Wales is absolutely the place to go. It is incredible and I love it dearly. Love the rally how-to idea. Yeah, me too. I'm pretty excited about it. I hope we can pull it off, as I have it in my head anyway. So the Caballero has a Zongshen engine. Well, that's probably great if you head towards China. Yeah, it's worth having a look at because it also seems quite cheap. Have you used the drive mode dash for offline navigation? I don't quite know what you're talking about there, Bob. You might have to ask me again. Do I think I've ridden my longest ever ride already, or do I have an epic? No, absolutely not. I would say that the longest ride I've ever done was Dakar, and that was only 10,000 K. So that means there's a lot more thousands of Ks to do. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of just want to do anything that excites me and takes me to places that I wouldn't get to see otherwise, really. That's kind of the point of adventure riding, right? Is you kind of force yourself to go into places that make you a little bit more interested in the world. So there we go. There was one question on beforehand that I wanted to answer as well. Let me find it. I'm not very good at this computer thing today. Rad Raven, have I tried Drive Mode? Is the software that came out on the PR7 tablet? No, I haven't. I will have a look at that. So Nate Bird. So there is a similar thing to this that I would love to go and do one of the BDRs somewhere. That will definitely be in the list over the next couple of years. The only problem is we have to be able to come to the States and ride there. But I've also been slowly working on a project with another friend of mine, a guy called Isaac Johnston. He makes videos basically on Instagram. If you haven't seen his YouTube channel is incredible and no one watches it, which is a really big shame, because he makes really wholesome, good videos about life, and he loves dirt bikes and he does really dumb things on them all the time. If you haven't seen it, go and check out his channel. But he has a route planned that goes basically from Utah to the Canadian border, single track most of the way, and I would love to make that film. Any plans on getting into trail riders for beginners? Yeah, a little bit, yes. It's part of our next season of Mini Tip Monday. Not so much about where you can go trail riding, because that's very country specific, but part of our next series of Mini Tip Monday is to start to introduce a little bit more of that kind of content of how to get into dirt bikes, lessons on dirt bikes with people who are less experienced as kind of examples and so on. So kind of not directly, but indirectly, yes. All right, I will have a look at that software, Rad Raven. Are there any places that scare you, but you'd love to go ride there anyway? Yeah, for sure. I think whenever I don't know if maybe I'm a little bit broken like this, but whenever somewhere is super remote, it like has a draw for me. You know, as soon as you're more than a day away from anywhere safe, more than walking distance away, I really like that feeling of being in a place like that. And I would say anytime you go into what like a quote unquote wilderness zone where petrol is not around the corner and help is not around the corner, that's exciting. The ultimate one, and I don't know that anyone's going to do this in the next 10 years, maybe they will, but a few people keep trying and it keeps not happening, is the Darien Gap, that little bit of land between Colombia and Panama that you're not allowed to go into, that you can't really ride through because it's untouched jungle. A few people go through every now and then, but I don't know of anyone riding a bike through there successfully since like the late 80s. No one's done it in a car for a long time. And as it's got more relaxed there, it's opened up more, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. There's a couple of other places like that where it's kind of true wilderness and you know that, yeah, the help's not around the corner. That's always a little bit exciting. You have to keep your wits about you and ride smart, and that gets me excited in a different kind of way to anything else. I think that, you know, you have that with the stands and with Russia and so on. Those places are so empty that you really quickly are like aware of your own, how do I say this? Aware of your own mortality, which makes you feel alive. You know, what's the famous quote? The closer to death you get, the more you feel alive, basically. But you don't have to get that close to feel quite alive. So that's those places are probably that. Guido, I don't know how you say that. Sorry, but I will answer your question. I'm new to dirt bike riding, love Mini Tip Mondays. Have you thought about a series of how to improve riding from zero to expert progression? Someone might have just asked. Nobody actually asked that question. I have, but it's quite a complicated thing to put together. And the main reason that I started with Mini Tip Monday was to make quite simple videos. Over time, those have got a lot more complicated. And it's something I've thought about, but I haven't really done anything about. So one of the limitations of this, and this is not a bad thing in any way, is that when it comes to the lessons that we produce in Mini Tip Monday, those all have to not conflict with a little bit of other work I do. So I work for a company called Off-Road Skills. It's actually my parents' company, but there's a team of us who are freelance instructors. And under that, we're kind of contracted to make sure that we don't cross that boundary of taking what they have put together as a program for teaching people from zero to quite a high level of riding we don't take that and then start making money off that for ourselves. It's like a protection mechanism. So most of the things I teach in Mini Tip Monday are not lessons that we cover in that school, or they're the same ideas but presented in my own kind of wrapper, because I think just out of a respect thing to not cross that boundary. Yeah, I think that kind of answers that question. Yes, I have thought about it, but no, it's not necessarily something that I can like do in a way that doesn't cross that line of taking what I've learned from what they've taught me about teaching and repurpose that into something I make money from in some way or another, or undermines what they do. If we did it, we would probably do it as like a joint thing where it's through their channel, not mine, if that makes sense. So yeah, but if you want to learn to ride off-road a little bit and get some really great foundational skills, off-road skills is the place. I'll probably be there. So referencing the 701 earlier and talk of rallying, a rally kit goes a long way to making them usable as a road-going adventure bike. It really does. There's no doubt about that. And I think my only problem with the 701 in that, guys, is that a little bit like you have with a dirt bike when you adventurify, it's really easy to ruin what's good about them and spend a huge amount of money doing it. I'm sure you know if you've got one, Paul. I don't know if you do have one, but if you have one, you can spend a lot of money on a rally kit on a 701, make it an expensive bike, and then you put too much luggage on it and you don't manage the suspension balance. You can start to undo that quite quickly. So yeah. What's the most difficult video you've ever made? Owen, what a question. What is the most difficult video I've ever made? Probably the first one. And not making videos is an interesting discussion, because there's obviously the technical side of it, which is always difficult. I'm always trying to improve and make them better and make them look better. And the technicality of that can be quite difficult. Sometimes it's the editing skill. The video I made in Iceland, technically on the editing side, was really difficult. I had to learn a lot of new skills, and that was kind of why I tried to do it the way I did it. But I think for me, the most difficult videos are always the ones where I'm the face of it and I have to talk to camera. I'm pretty uncomfortable with that. And so I would say, like, my first video that I ever put on YouTube was probably one of the hardest, because you have to, for me, I never really wanted to be in front of camera. And any time where I haven't been doing that a lot, and then I suddenly start putting myself in front of camera because I need to, or it fits the story or whatever, that's always really difficult. So hopefully that answers your question. Great setup. North Wales to Morocco, comfy 456 day or Yamaha T7 for the sand in Morocco. Totally depends how good you are on a bike, Owen. I would say I think the best way to decide this is, and this is I believe a David Knight quote. He's a famous British enduro rider. He's headed to his first Dakar this year. He's a total legend in off-road riding. And he always said it as though you should set your bike up for the riding you're worst at. Now, if you're a really technically good off-road rider, just take an adventure bike, because the comfort level is going to make it way more enjoyable. A T7 will be okay in the sand. Depends how big the dunes are you want to go up. But if you're a much more novice off-road rider, take a smaller bike. It's just, you can set them up relatively comfortable, deal with the limitations, and enjoy the ride when you know it's going to be most difficult and you're going to be most uncomfortable. If you're a super experienced off-road rider, you're not going to A, worry about crashing in the sand or getting stuck, and B, you're much less likely to do it. So it's just going to be better. I hope that answers that question. KTM 6 days. Okay, yeah. And again, like, I wouldn't worry about the limitations of a 6 days. I'd maybe just stick one of those like little Touratech fairings on it, and a more roady sort of tire to do the mileage, and it'll be fine. What's a good beginner adventure bike? CB500, V-Strom 650. Want to stay lower weight but still good off-road. CRF 250L. The CB500X is okay, but you have to do a lot to it to make it a good adventure bike. I think you have to go down that Rally Raid Products kit route, and it's expensive. V-Strom 650 is a lovely bike. It's not an adventure bike. It's a street bike that can deal with gravel roads. This is always the $1 million question, really. I I think surprisingly in that same category, if you're willing to go a little bit older with your bike, the old BMW F750 GS, I think it was called, that was surprisingly good. It was easy to ride. The suspension was limited, but it was easy to ride. It rode really nice on gravel roads, better than a V-Strom 650. The suspension was better. It's just, that's a pretty good bike for that kind of thing. Yeah, I think that kind of CRF 250L, if you don't live in the UK or Europe, a DLZ 400, great bike for adventure riding, because it's a trail bike and it's got 400cc 4-stroke engine. It's going to go a long way. It's a really difficult question. It depends. I think the balance comes down to how much road versus how much off-road are you going to do, and what does your off-road look like. If you want to go ride single track, those two bikes aren't great. If you're just going to bob along a dirt road, those bikes are probably fine. And then I would probably take the V-Strom over the CB500, because the V-Strom's a really good little street bike. I haven't answered that question very well. It's very abstract and a bit dependent. If you give me some more information on what you want to do, I'll answer it better. So this is an interesting one. With the collective Pavey Dakar experience, do you think setting up a privateer team for pay driver racing tuitions or experiences? No, not really. And not because it's not a good idea, but because I think it's a very dedicated thing. I think you either have to go all in on that or not. And funnily enough, Lyndon Poskett, now that he's stopped riding around the world, is doing exactly the same thing, I believe. He just announced it the other day that he's going to be running some kind of rally school with dedicated rally bikes. That's the other thing, is there's a big difference between riding a full-blown KTM rally bike and a dirt bike with a fairing on it. They're very different experiences, and rally bikes are super expensive to buy into. But I think he's got a fleet of rally bikes, super good road books, and so on. And he's got as much knowledge as anyone about that now. You know, he's a really good rally rider, so that's a good person to do that. And there's a lot of other people already doing that kind of situation, running privateer teams, doing support. I think if you're going to go down that route, you have to go all in. And it's not that it wouldn't be fun. It's just a different thing. Good question though. Paul says on his 701 he's got the Raid kit. Raid are a pretty good company. I ran it without the rally kit at Dawn to Dusk. Does well for an overweight enduro bike. It really does. It's a great bike. It's just got limitations. Evening Lel and Happy New Year. Do you think 1000cc plus adventure bikes are becoming more popular for off-road riding, or are smaller cc bikes gaining off-road? That is another good question. I think it's both. I think it's headed in both directions, and maybe the kind of middleweight bit is going to take up quite a bit of that market. You know, the 790, 700, 900 Tiger sort of thing. That's going to become the sweet spot. But I think big bikes are gaining popularity still all the time. And then if you live in the UK, you're probably starting to realize that smaller bikes are easier to ride when it rains, basically. I still haven't finished my beer, by the way. I haven't made any progress. Yeah, that's a good question. You need solid numbers to know the real answer to that, but it feels very much like people are starting to realize that small bikes make good adventure bikes, because they're a bit more manageable. Still, oh, that is amazing. So Paul basically had his bike stolen and it was recovered in Russia, and sent back to the UK, which is very impressive. What is the project video you're most proud of, and why? Always interesting to hear the creator's point of view. This is a really weird question actually to answer, because I think most people who are creators of some description, you have like this constant desire to do better and improve, and you always go through these slumps where you think you're not getting that better, or you think your old work wasn't that good, and every now and then you'll go back and watch it and realize that it was probably a lot better than you realized at the time. I think the one I'm most proud of I mean, there's lots of videos that fall into the mix when I watch them again now, and I'm like, oh wow, I did a pretty good job of that. I'm quite happy with how that looked. But the one I'm most proud of was probably the Nepal one, and it's because I didn't know anything about making video at that point. I'd shot maybe 10 videos in my life, but I'm a photographer. That's what I started out as, and I didn't know anything about it. And I'd never flown a drone in my life. I bought one to go on this trip. And the first time I flew it was over a flash flood river, basically like a glacial river. And I saw this place and I was like, we need to shoot this shot now. And the shot, if you look closely, is terrible. There's a lot of mistakes in it. It was underexposed. And I forgot to take the little bit of foam off the gimbal. But over the week and a half of that trip, I got better at shooting and I learned more. And the product that I came out with at the end, I was so stoked on. I didn't even know really how to edit a good video together. I was just watching Casey Neistat vlogs, and I knew how to point a camera at something and roughly get a good shot. And the product we came out with at the end, the film I made was like one of the best memories I've got, and I really enjoyed shooting it. And I was kind of surprised myself that I had that capacity. Yeah, so that one, and probably probably the one in Iceland. Not that I didn't think the story I told very well. I didn't really know how to tell the story very well of that trip, and I could have done that better. But the quality of the shots and so on, I'm pretty chuffed with. Like some of the drone shots in that are really good, and they were quite hard to do. So, yeah, I'm pretty stoked on that one as well. So next question. Thanks for trying. I'm new to riding at 65 and want to take longer trips and feel confident on some gravel and dirt roads, but I don't want to be overly concerned with a big heavy bike. Well, it depends how, I think what I would say then is it depends how comfortable you are to not carry a huge amount of luggage and deal with a little bit of, wind and so on in your face. If you're happy with that, I would just go for maybe a KLR 650 or a DR 650 are probably the best bets. I think they're great bikes if you can get those. If you live in Europe, it's not so easy, but in the States and Oz and South Africa, you can still buy those bikes and they're really good for that. They're not too heavy. They're super reliable. They're easy to ride. Just don't put too much luggage on them because they'll handle badly. But they're quite low to the ground as well. You'll enjoy those a lot and they'll last forever. And you can probably buy one for the price of a bag of chips and a beer. So they're a good shout. Don't underestimate them either. A lot of people will tell you they're not great, but they really are good bikes. Okay. Why do Honda think the Africa Twin competes in the same class as the GS? PS, I quite like the Africa Twin off-road. I quite like the Africa Twin off-road as well. It's a good bike. It's not a great bike, but it's a good bike. Why do they think it competes in the same class as the GS? Because it doesn't compete with the bikes that are smaller than it very well. That's why I think when they're deciding what they're going to do, they decide the price point and they look at it and they go, well, KTM just made a bike that is 30 kilos lighter and nearly the same power, so we can't put it up against that. So let's just put it up against the next class, I suppose, in terms of price and so on. I would imagine that's it. And then Paul's partner, Bex, asks, when you've ridden in competition, do you get nervous and how do you manage that, i.e. stop it affecting your riding performance? So I would say when I was racing a lot, the only thing that I had in the toolbox, and I was bad for this, like I was pretty quick-ish when I was racing a lot. I wasn't like world class, but I was quick enough. And I would say that was a really big limiting factor in my performances, that I would get super nervous at the start and make lots of mistakes for the first 20 minutes and then ride really well for the next rest of the day. But I would say that gets better the more practice you do, the more confident you are in your own ability to be able to deal with what's coming, the better it is. And then I would say the other thing that's going to help massively, and this is going to make me sound like a crazy person, meditate, man. Like that really helps. Meditating, anything that gives you like a little bit more control over your mind in that situation is huge. Another one, and again, this is going to make me sound like another crazy person, but a few people out there might know of this, a guy called Wim Hof. his technique is really, really good for calming your nerves because it gives you a huge adrenaline dump. And then that puts you in that kind of state that the nerves put you in, but it's controlled, so it calms you right down. It's really good for performance anxiety. It's perfectly normal. Everyone gets it. Some of us get it way worse than others. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Kerry, what is the best rally for your first one? The one that excites you the most? They're all good. They're like for different reasons. I've out of the ones I've only done Ceres in Europe, and I love it. I think it's a great race. It's an amazing place to ride a motorbike. The people that run it are very Greek. There's lots of craziness goes on. It's everything you would want in a mini adventure with a nice hotel, basically. But I think the one that you look at and you're like, oh, that looks good, I'm going to go do it, because they're designed for people. They're not designed for pro riders. And I think that's the best thing about all those rallies, is that they're designed for normal people. And as they're designed for normal people, the routes aren't mental. They're just, they're tough enough to push you. But I think they're a great option. Difficult times, but do you have any big projects? I have nothing fixed at the moment. I have ideas, Owen, but they're just ideas. I did cover a few of them earlier in the live stream, what those ideas are. A rally project would be good. A project on a really crap bike would be good. And a budget adventure. I would also love to do like try and make an adventure film, but on a ridiculously tight budget. If you were buying an adventure bike in 2021, what would you buy? A Tenere 700 or a KTM 790 or a Tiger 900? All three of those are fantastic bikes, and it's just going to come down to how much money you've got. I would probably put my money in a Tenere 700. You can make it a little bit better again for not a lot of money. And it's a really nice bike. It's just really nice to ride in general. Yeah, so that's what I would do, probably. You've been to Canada, the wildlife can kill you, and the moose and the bloody big bears. Did you have any protection? No, not at all. So one thing I learned, I didn't know anything about this the first time I went to Canada. I was quite young. I'm very fortunate to get asked to write an article about like a guided tour there. So I went to Quebec, and there was bears everywhere and moose everywhere. And dirt bikes are super good at scaring animals. So that wasn't a problem. No protection required. I talked about it earlier. My friend Isaac, we did a podcast with him about being a better adventurer and how you deal with that kind of thing in the wild, because he spends a lot of time out in the wilderness. It's kind of his job. So, and he says he carries some bear spray, but it's mostly just for his own comfort level. He's never had to use it, because bears are generally pretty scared of humans. They don't want to mess around with you. Can I paste a link in the comments? Yeah, I can. Basically, his name is Wim Hof. And like, don't get me wrong, I am fully aware that Wim Hof is a crazy dude, but he's quite an interesting crazy dude. If you've never come across him, his shtick is that he's really good at dealing with the cold. He's got like 20 plus world records for doing stupid things in the cold, like running marathons, and he climbed 2/3 of the way up Everest in his shorts. So that's the kind of guy he is. Where's his website? I'll put that in the comments at the end, Paul. I don't know that unless I can do it through Restream. There we go. There you go. So, does the 790 suffer damage from its low-down fuel tanks off-road? Is it not a bit pricey too? I would argue it depends on whether you buy it at full price or not. I will. They did a sale this year, and KTM are quite good at doing this. It was 10.5 grand at the end of the cycle. So unless they produce less bikes this year, same thing probably happens. It happens quite a lot with KTM, and I think it's something they need to stop if they want to maintain that level of their price of their bikes. But that's a whole different rabbit hole. 11 995. It's not cheap, but I think it's an incredible bike. And what you're paying for really with the 790 is the fact that the suspension's better than all the other bikes in terms of the quality of it. And the fuel tanks, no, they're super robust. They've been running the same design on their rally bikes for decades. The plastic they use is incredibly tough. They're really, really good at taking damage. And I think to the point where I would prefer to have those fuel tanks than I would prefer to have crash bars and add weight to my bike. I would be very impressed if you managed to get through the plastic cover that's on the sump guard and the fuel tank. That is a big crash, or going down the tarmac for 100 meters. Yeah, so that's that. Owen Williams, good question. What simple mods would you do to a T7? Depends on what you want to do to it. If you're not super into riding like off-road quick, technical off-road, you're not trail riding your T7 on a daily basis, I would do nothing apart from put heated grips on it and a GPS on the GPS mount on the top of it. If you want to put a bit of money into it, I would probably add some kind of fuel controller. There's a bunch of different options you can do with this just to richen it up a tiny bit. It's a little bit jerky off the bottom, but you can do that in a bunch of different ways. I haven't tried any of them, so I don't know the answer, but ones that look good, and maybe the booster plug, it's called booster plug. It just tricks the bike into thinking it's colder than it is, like the temperature's colder than it is, so it puts more fuel in. You can get more and more advanced with that, up to a power commander or a new ECU or whatever you want to spend, really. That's going to help as well. You just smooth it out a little bit off the bottom. And then I would go down the route of improving the suspension. The options there are wide, from a basic revalve from a suspension person that knows what they're doing. My recommendation for that in the UK is a guy called Dr. Shocks. He's maybe not the most quick acting person, but his work is always really good. And he's very creative with different bikes. And then you could go down the route of a cartridge kit and a new shock, or full new suspension at both ends. The budget is up to whatever you want to do. If you're good with engineering, which I have a feeling you might be, if you are the Owen Williams from Swansea University, you could revalve it yourself. But yeah, that's what I would do. And then my last mods would be, it needs a better sump guard, but I don't want, it's a light bike, so I think you want to make it lighter than heavier. There's actually a really good blog on this. Someone I came across made basically a page about Yamaha 10RA 700s getting lighter rather than heavier as an overall thing, which is awesome. If you can shave another 5 kilos off it, it's going to make a big difference. So maybe a lithium battery chucks a bunch of that weight out for not a lot of money. Yeah, and then if you're really feeling fruity, I put an exhaust on it. But I don't think you should put an exhaust on it without putting a fuel controller on it, because it will be too lean with the current emissions. It won't make it nice to ride. It might make more power, but it won't make it nice to ride. So that is that question. New tires. I wouldn't run those tires if I was going to ride a lot of off-road. They're nice on dirt roads, like dry dirt roads, but they're terrible in the mud. Do you think Neil Hawker will beat Toby Price in the Dakar? That does not need answering. No, the answer is no. Which ways do you think the experience crosses over, as in big bike experience to enduro bike? And so I think personally they cross over a little bit in both directions if you get pretty comfortable on one. But I would say learning an enduro, they're both difficult. They're different things. They're almost different sports. The one thing that getting decent on an enduro bike really teaches you is to move your body a lot, because you have to. They're very dynamic things, and it's easy to not do that on an adventure bike or take too long to learn it. You have to put a lot of body English into making dirt bikes work. The one thing I noticed, that unless you're a really experienced enduro bike rider, when people come from dirt bikes to adventure bikes, I think I noticed that the clutch control, balance and throttle control that adventure bikes demand, if you want to ride them difficult places, a lot of people don't have from enduro bikes, because you don't need it. You only need it if you want to be really good. and you want to kind of be racing at like an expert level on an enduro bike in enduros, then you're going to start to develop that technical skill where your clutch control and your throttle control are quite fine, and you've got really good balance and you can deal with it, and that translates really well then. Or if you're a good trials rider, not if you're a mediocre trials rider. If you're like a sportsman to a low clubman trials rider, the same thing. You don't have like that good enough balance for it to translate that well. The thing you've got is good body movement and experience of like dirt. That's really important. Going the other way, I think if you spend a lot of time riding an adventure bike and you get pretty good on one, your hand is forced about learning good clutch control, good throttle control, and good balance the same way it is when you ride a lot of trials, because adventure bikes are very unforgiving. If you start to ride one in a technical place, that happens quite quickly. So those are the kind of two switch arounds that I would say. I still haven't answered this one dude's question off the studio, off the comment on. Oh, now it's blocked me out. I'll try and get it up on here, and then I need to finish my beer as well and stop doing that. Where are we? There we are. Channel dashboard. Sorry about this. Has anyone got any further questions? We've managed to pump in some questions there, that is for sure. So, would love to hear your thoughts on adventure bike. If adventure bikes and adventure riders should aspire to be at the Dakar rally level, both from bike technology and capability and riding skill, or do you think that's missing the point and completely unnecessary and overkill? I think I agree with you in that is missing the point. There's two kind of things here. One, the skill level to ride Dakar, surprisingly, I don't think is that high. There's plenty of cases. Technically, when you do that race, the riding isn't technical. There's much harder riding to be found every day of the week in every country of the world on a dirt bike. It's really, really easy. Not really, really easy. It's easy to find much harder riding. The technicality of Dakar comes in the fact it's just a really long way. And most of that can be covered by being fit and by being mentally tough. So in terms of riding ability, the aspiration doesn't need to be insane. In terms of the bikes, I think the aspiration to make your bike more rally-esque kind of misses what a Dakar bike is about. Dakar bikes aren't about traveling anywhere. They're literally designed to let you go as fast as possible across the desert. That is their only purpose. They are insanely quick. They make so much power. They have incredible suspension that only really works once you're going fast. It's okay at slow speed, but they are much better doing 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 miles an hour than they are doing 20, 25, 30. In every way, the engines are not great at that speed. They're not really designed for it. They make 75 horsepower from a single cylinder 450. Like they rev to the moon. They're really, really aggressive with how they accelerate. The suspension is really stiff and the comfort factor is 0. And it's getting more and more over the years. The fairings are getting smaller. Everything is getting more and more compact. It's just about going fast and being comfortable going fast. It's not about anything else. And when you ride one, that is immediately apparent. They are, in the best way possible, utterly terrifying because they're ridiculous. Like a full-blown rally bike, even if they're quite easy to ride, they're really, really, they're intense. And I think you see it in Dakar because when people aren't super good riders and then they go to Dakar on a full-blown like KTM rally replica bike, it can eat them alive. If you're not experienced and you're not strong and you're not capable of dealing with that bike, they're tricky to ride, and people don't finish when they would have finished on something easier and smaller and less designed for that purpose. Ultimately those rally bikes are designed from the top down, so the elite riders build them and then everyone else buys them. And when you go to riding adventure bikes, I'm sure like Lyndon Poskett would say this. He's kind of the person that's built the most rally-esque adventure bike because he started with a Dakar bike. But that's because he still had the goal of riding very fast everywhere and of doing rallies along the way. If that is not your goal, I don't see the point. Like, anyone that's ridden Dakar or any other rally on a big bike will tell you that the liaison sections are hell. They're so uncomfortable. They're cold to ride. They vibrate like crazy. And if you're not doing riding that's pushing your personal technical limit, I would just go more in the route of comfort, because the ride is going to be nicer. That's kind of my feeling on it anyway. I think the aspiration to be better is a really good one. And there's some tech that, like with Formula One or MotoGP, that's going to bleed into normal bikes from that area. But trying to build the most rally possible bike out of an adventure bike, I think misses the point a bit. Like, your adventure bike should be a tool to get you places and let you have fun, not a bike that makes you suffer on the daily. Like, I don't want to ride that. So next question. So we're going to give this 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to go and have my sushi for dinner. We'll answer this one first. Will you be live during and after the Dakar? We're going to do a live stream at the end to kind of wrap the show up. Way less people watch that, but we'll still do it because we like to talk about it. And during, we might do one at the halfway point. It depends a little bit on other things, but we'll definitely do a wrap-up show. And we'll go from there. Could you do the Ceres rally on a 350 KT? Absolutely. That picture in the background of this stream is me doing Ceres on a 250F. I would suggest that if you want to ride fast, don't do it on a 250F because it's a bit sketchy. They rev too high. They skip around off all the rocks, and everyone in my class that year had a massive crash of some description, including myself. So don't ride a 250, but a 350, absolutely more than a good enough bike. It has more than enough power, and you can stay low enough in the revs most of the time that it's going to be really good. Yeah, more than good enough. I mean, they make 50 horsepower nearly, so there's plenty. What's the place to start with regaining fitness for hard riding, particularly when you can't get out riding? Time on a bike, but what else? No, I just think any kind of circuit training or something like that, time on a rower, anything. Do you know, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to go and do Dakar, then you need like a really good endurance fitness program. If you don't, find a circuit class, a CrossFit class, something like that, that's just gonna make your heart rate get high and do a little bit regularly. It makes a huge difference. I don't do a huge amount of fitness these days because I'm not trying to race to be fast. I never really did do a huge amount of fitness. But yeah, that would be my advice. Would just do something that gets your heart rate super high and makes you do some push-ups and some squats, and that will cover your base more than everything. And if you got some time and you don't think it's too a little bit too weird, do some yoga. I only started doing yoga like a year and a half ago, but it's really good. No, it doesn't make you fit, it just makes you flexible and makes riding less uncomfortable. Sounds like being a good navigator, a decent rider, and having endurance fitness wise is a good makeup for Dakar. Exactly. If you're fit, everything else gets easier because you're less tired. The navigation in Dakar is not that hard. I think the bit you need is just a bit of grit, good fitness, and a good enough rider that you're not just at the back of the race all the time, because then it's hard. But if you've got most of that package built up, you're an okay enduro rider or off-road rider, and you're fit enough to ride for 10 days in a row, and you're tough enough to deal with the fact you'll be a bit tired from a lack of sleep, you can do it for sure. It won't be easy, but you can do it. I think that's kind of the cool thing about Dakar, right? Is that like it is potentially achievable if you put the work in and you're kind of doing the same thing as elite riders. You can't do that in many sports. So what do you think of the predecessor of the Tenere 700, the XT660Z? I didn't ride one that much. I rode one a couple of times, and it kind of, to me, is a very different bike. I think the T7 is dramatically better as an all-round bike, and the 660 was okay. It had some really good ideas in there, but it was kind of a similar sort of bike to a 650 GS, right? Where It was a bit rudimental. The engine was a bit lumpy and agricultural. The suspension was really basic, cheap. The controls were the same. The clutch was heavy. It looked really good. And then there was a few little ideas in there, like the tow rope hook that was on the bottom triple clamp. That's pretty cool. There's some things like that where you're like, oh, that's really well thought out. You've clearly got a good idea of where you want to go with this. But then by the same token, the execution of the bike was okay. It's not bad. It's not a bad bike at all. And you can definitely pick them up cheap. But the Tenere 700 is just way better all around. So there we go. If you were going to make an adventure film, where would you go? I talked about this in my Patreon stream earlier. I would love... Where would I go? So it depends if I'm making a film or if I'm going to have a really good holiday adventure and film it. There's two ideas I've got for a film. One of them is in Morocco. Because of the versatility and the idea I have for this film, but it's not happened yet, and it might take a few years for it to actually happen. Another one is the States. Just there's a specific route in the States that I would really like to ride. And then I'm personally really interested by the places that you don't see many other people go for that purpose of exploring. I'd love to go to Sri Lanka. I've seen a little bit of it, and there's parts of it that seem really, really interesting. I think Alex Chacon made a video there years ago where he flew there, rented a scooter, and rode around for a few days, and it looked rad. It looks super good. I was really excited by it. And then, yeah, maybe some bits of Central America. I don't know if anyone watched Long Way Up, but it doesn't paint Central America in the best light. They skip around Colombia, they run away through Panama, and then Mexico, they get in a bus. Which is a whole different story. I get why they did it, but there's parts of Central America that I find really interesting. I would love to go and explore a little bit more off the beaten path. It looks super beautiful and the riding looks really good, and that's kind of the point, right? So maybe one of those many places. Also, I would quite like to ride the Simpson one day, but that's the Simpson Desert. How to get back mental confidence after a big accident? What a fantastic question. Time. You need time in a lot of different ways. I had a really big crash. It was a silly crash, but I had a really big crash last summer, I believe it was. I forget now. I had quite a bad concussion from it. And it was a silly mistake. It wasn't super fast. It was just I hit my head quite hard because I did a bit of a ragdoll. And it took at least 10 months to kind of get back to the point where I was like, I am the same person on a motorbike that I was before. And every time I've had a big crash, it's the same. It takes time and repetition and patient progression. I think if you try to force it, you try to go back to that same level straight away, you just run into a roadblock in your head. And I think every subsequent crash that gets worse. People say that it's getting older, but I think a part of that is the repetition of having that same mistake, right? You see it in races all the time. They can take one, they can take two, but then 3 and 4, and they're not the same person anymore. So that's the answer to that. I think you have to keep riding, and you have to accept that if you have a big crash and you smash your confidence, you got to build it back up again. Hopefully that helps you anyway. What's it like being you? Is it as easy as you look? So this is from my very good childhood friend, Michael Caton. It's definitely hard being me. I mean, it's tough to be this cool, right? That was a joke for anyone that didn't get it. That was a joke. Cool. So that is probably about it. My voice box hurts from talking for the last hour and a half. I'm going to go finish my beer. It's definitely warm now. Thank you very much for coming and seeing in 2021. We've got one more question. It's only one more day away from 2021. What's your New Year's resolution? Grow the channel, any competition? Great question. I've spent a long time trying to grow the channel, and I would say mildly unsuccessfully. Whoa, what did I just do there? I just made you massive, Norman. Sorry. There we go. So I kind of realized in 2020, that's kind of part of an epiphany I went through, that it doesn't bring you any joy in life. If it grows, it's going to grow. My goal is to just keep making videos that I enjoy because I enjoy it, to ride my bike as much as possible and make sure that it's fun, man. That's it. That's I think that is what life for me should be about. Enjoy the experience, right? If you can figure out how to do that, then we're on the way to something good. Leave the world in a better place than you found it, and enjoy the experience. So yeah, there we go. Happy New Year, everyone. And I'll be back with some new videos soon.